Beneath a red sky stretched wide as sorrow, the wind wandered the desert like a mourning spirit. It carried the scent of juniper smoke and rain not yet fallen. Iona Willowbird walked alone through that vast emptiness, her moccasins scuffed, her grandmother's blanket wrapped around her shoulders like a memory she could not set down. The world was quiet except for the rasp of her breath and the low hum of distant coyotes. Her lips were cracked from thirst, but her grief ran deeper than thirst could touch. She had buried her grandmother that morning beneath a cottonwood tree where the earth was soft and red. The last of her family returned to dust. When the sun bled itself out behind the mesas, she saw a glimmer far off, a cabin light trembling against the dark. A single square of gold, fragile and alive. She stopped, uncertain whether to trust that flicker. But the cold was already climbing her spine, and the desert had a cruel way of taking those who lingered too long in sorrow. She whispered, "Where should I go now?" And the wind, mercifully or cruelly, offered no answer. So she went toward the light, the last one left in her world. The man who opened the door was enormous, his shadow filling the threshold. His face was half in lamplight, half in shadow, and his eyes, pale as washed river stones, studied her with a quiet startle. He'd been alone long enough to forget what surprise felt like. "I lost my way," she said softly, though the truth was much heavier than that. He stepped aside without a word. Inside smelled of leather, smoke, and loneliness. The cabin's single room was tidy in a way that spoke more of habit than comfort. He poured her a cup of water, rough hands trembling only slightly as he handed it over. She drank as though the act itself was a prayer. "I'm Bo Carter," he said after a time. "Folks call me the giant cowboy." Her eyes flickered up, curious. "And do you like that?" He smiled faintly, a ghost of something once warm. "Can't say I do. But it keeps folks from gettin' too close." Outside, thunder rolled deep and long. Inside, silence deepened until it was almost tender. She told him her name, Iona, and he repeated it under his breath, as if trying to remember how language could sound like beauty. Then came the scrape of boots outside. A lantern's glow cut through the cracks in the wall. The door opened again, and Sheriff Clay Maddox stepped in, rain on his hat and suspicion in his eyes. "You know what folks will say, Bo," he said without preamble. "A woman, an Indian woman, stayin' out here alone with you. You can't keep her here." Bo's hand tightened around his cup. "She's got nowhere else to go." "That may be," the sheriff said, voice heavy with a different kind of pity. "But you know this town. They'll turn on you both." Iona stood very still, her eyes steady as river stones. "I can leave if I'm trouble." Bo looked at her then, the hollowness in her face, the way she held her grief with quiet dignity, and something inside him shifted, something long frozen beginning to thaw. "You'll stay," he said simply. The sheriff hesitated, jaw working. Then he sighed, tipping his hat. "Then you'd best be ready for what follows." And with that, he left them to the sound of rain beating the roof like a slow drum. Morning came gray and raw. Iona rose early, lighting the stove, moving quietly as though afraid to disturb the air. Bo watched her from the doorway, the steam from his coffee rising like ghosts between them. He'd forgotten what another person's presence felt like, the small sounds, the shared warmth. Yet already he felt the weight of eyes waiting beyond these hills. By noon, whispers had reached town. Martha Lang at the general store spoke first, her tongue sharp as a tack. "He's got her up there in his cabin," she said, shaking her head with feigned sorrow. "A heathen girl. It's indecent." And so the story took root, sprouting faster than truth ever could. When Bo rode in for supplies 2 days later, the air in the store was thick with judgment. Conversations stopped when he entered. He gathered his things quietly, pretending not to feel the heat of their stares. Iona waited by the horse outside, eyes on the ground, sensing the same chill that once stalked her people from place to place. That night, back at the cabin, she hummed softly as she mended a torn shirt. The melody was old, something her grandmother used to sing to call peace back into a room. The sound softened the cabin, even softened Beau's grief, like a hand pressed gently to a wound. He found himself watching her reflection in the window, firelight moving across her hair. "You can stop lookin'," she said without turning. He flushed. "Didn't mean to stare." "I don't mind," she said, the faintest smile in her voice. The quiet stretched again, this time gentler. Then a crash, glass breaking. A stone rolled across the floor, words scrawled on it in charcoal. "Send her away." Beau's jaw set hard. He stepped outside, scanning the darkness, but the night kept its secrets. The wind had teeth now. In the days that followed, the tension grew. Ayanna stayed mostly inside, helping with chores, teaching Beau small songs in her tongue. He listened as if each word was a gift, though he never repeated them aloud. The townsfolk stopped coming to trade. When he rode in, people moved aside. He could feel the edges of their disapproval cutting him clean. One afternoon, after a particularly harsh confrontation in town, Beau found himself standing before Martha Lang. "You think I'm doin' wrong," he said. "But she's lost everyone she's ever had. What kind of man would I be if I turned her out?" Martha's eyes narrowed. "Then make it right. Marry her or send her away. You can't live in sin and call it kindness." He said nothing. The idea struck deeper than he expected. Marriage had once been a word that meant both hope and heartbreak to him. His late wife had died 2 winters past, fever taking her before sunrise. He'd never thought his heart could hold another. That night, Ayanna sensed the heaviness in him. "They've spoken to you," she said quietly. He nodded. "They want you gone." Her eyes dropped to the floor. "Do you want that too?" Beau looked at her for a long time. "No," he said finally. "I just wish the world didn't make kindness a crime." The silence after that felt like a bridge between them. Then, softly, she began to hum again, the same song from before, and Beau sat beside her, not touching, just listening until the fire burned low. At dawn, she left her grandmother's beaded necklace on the table, a circle of blue and white stones. "If I stay," she said, voice trembling but sure, "I must stay not as your burden but as your equal." Beau stared at the necklace, understanding blooming slowly but fully. He had been given a choice, to live by the town's rules or by the truth of his own heart. By noon, he saddled his horse and rode into town. People stopped what they were doing, watching as he dismounted and climbed the steps of the small wooden church. The preacher stood at the door, uncertainty shadowing his face. "I'm here to marry her," Beau said. "Today." Whispers surged like wind through wheat. Sheriff Maddox appeared, his expression unreadable. "You sure about this, Beau?" Beau nodded once. "As sure as I've ever been." Word reached Ayanna quickly. She came down the hill wrapped in her grandmother's blanket, eyes bright against the gray day. When she entered the church, every whisper died. She walked the aisle like one walking between 2 worlds, past disapproval, past shame, into the small clearing of light where Beau waited. The ceremony was simple, spoken in the trembling rhythm of new hope. Beau tied the beaded necklace around her wrist instead of a ring. When the preacher said, "You may kiss the bride," Beau hesitated. The world seemed to still, the dust hanging in the sunlight, the breath of the gathered crowd held tight. Then he bent, slowly, reverently, and kissed her. It was not passion that filled that kiss but gratitude, 2 broken things recognizing themselves whole. The sound of the wind outside softened, carrying the scent of rain and wild sage through the open door. That night, back at the cabin, Beau lit an old lantern and hung it near the window. Ayanna stood barefoot on the wooden floor, her shawl slipping from one shoulder. The air was quiet except for the faint hum of wind through the pines. Beau reached for her hand, uncertain but brave. "Would you dance with me?" he asked. She smiled, a small, shimmering thing, and nodded. They moved slowly, their steps unsure but true, a rhythm older than words. The lantern swung above them, casting golden circles over the walls. In that small room, time loosened its grip. Grief turned to grace, loneliness to belonging. When the song of the wind rose again, it no longer sounded like mourning but like a lullaby meant for them alone. Days passed, and the sharp edges of gossip dulled. Iana began tending to the sick, sharing herbs and remedies her grandmother had taught her. Children followed her through town, curious about her songs. Slowly, even Martha Lang found herself nodding a quiet greeting one morning, a basket of eggs in her hands. Iana accepted them with a smile that needed no words. Bo watched from the porch as she spoke with the townsfolk, her laughter soft as the creek in spring. Something in him eased. The world hadn't forgiven them, not entirely, but it had stopped shouting. Sometimes that was enough. Months turned to a gentle kind of peace. The desert bloomed with yellow flowers after the rain, and the fields around the cabin grew thick with grass. Iana planted herbs and wild mint, saying each name like a blessing. Bo built her a small garden fence and carved her name into the gate. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted everything in amber light, Iana came to him where he sat on the porch. She rested her head on his shoulder. "Now I know where to go," she said softly. He turned to her, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "Where's that?" "Here," she whispered. The night fell around them, and the first stars appeared, scattered like promise across the sky. Bo listened to the slow rhythm of her breathing, the steady pulse beneath his hand. It sounded like something eternal, the heartbeat of the land itself. Years later, when the cabin had weathered gray and the garden had grown wild, the story of the giant cowboy and the woman who came to his door became part of local legend. Folks told it in the evenings when the wind cried through the canyon, saying that sometimes love isn't found in the bright places but carried there from the dark. An old man's voice, Bo's or perhaps someone remembering him, whispered the truth beneath it all. That kindness, when chosen against the world, is its own kind of courage. And if ever a traveler found themselves lost on that lonely stretch of road at dusk, they might still see a lantern burning in the hills, a small light in the window of an old cabin. The kind of light that says, "You can come in. You are not alone." The desert wind would sigh through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and something sweeter still, and for a fleeting moment it would sound almost like laughter, almost like a song, almost like a promise.